Father, thank you. We give you praise. We declare to say thank you again for bringing us through hurricane season, sparing us as a nation. We thank you. Again, we ask your continued guidance to lead us through this pandemic and give us all the wisdom and the grace and help us as a nation, spare the lives of many and helping us through this difficult time. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thy unworthy servants, they gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultation, and grant that we have thy fear always before our eyes, and lay aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affection. The result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public way of peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and meeting together of the heart of all persons annexed within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. And the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Good morning, Senators. I beg to report that I have received correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the following motions and bill were passed in the House of Assembly and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Value Added Tax Act, Resolution of Parliament to approve draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 Order. Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament authorizing the Minister of Finance to borrow for capital or current expenditure of government. Economic Substance Amendment. I beg to announce that since the last sitting of Parliament, His Excellency has been pleased to assent to the following bills: Tourism Levy, St. Lucia Tourism Authority Amendment, Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment, Public Finance Management, Statements by Ministers. Papers to be laid. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 191 of 2020, Fiscal Incentive Stone Culture Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 192 of 2020, St. Lucia National Housing Corporation, Larisus Report, Vesting Order. Statutory Instrument Number 193 of 2020, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the making of an order for the 2017 supplement to the revised edition of the laws. Statutory Instrument Number 194 of 2020, Finance Administration Act, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow from the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China to finance the COVID-19 response project. Statutory Instrument Number 195 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly Number 4 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 196 of 2020, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Physical Distancing Number 4 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 197 of 2020, Gaming, Racing and Betting Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 198 of 2020, Gaming, Racing and Betting Bond and Security Instrument Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 199 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, Elite Medical Imaging, EMI Inc. Order. Statutory Instrument Number 200 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, Plastic Solution Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 201 of 2020, 2017 Supplement to the Revised Edition of the Laws, Commencement Order. Statutory Instrument Number 202 of 2020, Public Procurement Act, Commencement Order. Statutory Instrument Number 203 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, Trois Femmes Artisan Products Limited. Statutory Instrument Number 204 of 2020, Fiscal Incentives, CPAL Holdings Inc. Amendment Order.
Honorable Minister for Creative Industries in the Ministry of Tourism.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 205 of 2020, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, TTS Resorts Limited Order. Thank you.
Motions. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Value Added Tax Act, Resolution of Parliament to approve draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 Order. Whereas under Section 109(1)A of the Value Added Tax Act, Cap 15.42, the Act, it is provided that the Minister of Finance may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedules to the Act. And whereas it is further provided under Section 109(2) of the Act, that an order made pursuant to Section 109(1) of the Act is subject to an affirmative resolution of Parliament, except where the amendment is to customs tariff headings only. And whereas the Minister of Finance seeks approval of the draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 Order to amend Schedule 3 of the Act by affirmative resolution of Parliament to exempt imports by an elected parliamentarian for the benefit of children, the vulnerable and needy, persons in the constituency of the elected parliamentarian, of toys, food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use, such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items, including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations, including Christmas lights, ornaments and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season. Be it resolved that Parliament by affirmative resolution approves the draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 Order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt imports by an elected parliamentarian for the benefit of children, the vulnerable and needy persons in the constituency of the elected parliamentarian, of toys, food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use, such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items, including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations, including Christmas lights, ornaments and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season. This resolution, Madam President, seeks approval of this Honorable House for the amendment of Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt VAT on imports of toys, food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use, such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items, including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations, including Christmas lights, ornaments, and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season by elected parliamentarians. This will be effective, Madam President, from November 15, 2020 to January 31st, 2020. This will allow any parliamentarian, elected parliamentarian, who imported toys at any time from November 15, 2020, to be able to get them free of VAT. Madam President, we must order early in order to receive the goods before Christmas. This is usually what we do if we want to supply these goods to our constituents. Therefore, ordering in November or earlier gives sufficient lead time to get the goods here before Christmas. So if anybody had anything on back order, or if anybody had a pre-delivery, they would still benefit anytime from November 15th from this motion. So the backdating of this initiative is deliberate to accommodate any parliamentarian who may have ordered on time to receive it for Christmas. Also, the end date of January allows for orders that may be required after Christmas, since it is not specific to Christmas supplies only. It will strengthen and augment the concessions on the importation of barrels, which became effective since June of 2020, and that too will continue until January. Madam President, this motion has my full support, as I know it will go a long way in supporting the efforts of my fellow parliamentarians in meeting the needs of their constituents, and therefore I present this resolution for the approval of this Honorable House.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approve the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt imports by an elected parliamentarian for the benefit of children, the vulnerable, and needy in the constituency of the elected parliamentarian, of toys, food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items, including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations, including Christmas lights, ornaments, and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season. Leader of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to greet our fellow colleagues this morning, and since I suspect it will be our final sitting for the year, and as we approach the holiday season, I want to wish all of our colleagues, including you, Madam President, a safe and cheerful, joyful Christmas and holiday season. Madam President, as I stand to make a contribution on this motion, I wish first of all to establish something that is very important regarding the purpose for which this House or this Senate was constituted. We, by the mere construction or the layout of the membership, we have a government side, an independent side, and an opposition side. This suggests that one expects there to be debate, and sometimes we will agree, we will support with no hesitation, sometimes we will oppose vehemently, and sometimes we will support, but we will provide reasons why we have certain issues. And so, Madam President, before I actually state the position of the opposition on this bill, particularly mine, on this motion, I want to remind the House that, or the Senate, that we are not here as an opposition simply to oppose for opposing's sake. This Honorable House comes to seek approval and support for this motion. And as a responsible opposition, we have to ensure that there is proper treatment given to any motion, as with this one or any, that is brought to the House. And there must be room for thorough debate. That's why we call it a debate. And proper examination of the contents of the motion, and thereby giving us an opportunity as a Senate to debate and treat it as it should be. Madam President, we are not supposed to be merely cheerleaders of any tune that the government plays. And so we have to this morning present our views on some of the reservations we may have regarding this motion, and thereby hopefully giving it proper treatment. Now, as anyone may look at this motion and examine it and see, no one can doubt that there may be good intent, particularly the way it's stated with regard to providing an opportunity for the vulnerable, for children, and the needy to benefit from the piece of legislation or the amendment that has been made. Now, as regards the timing of the exemption and how it may have affected elected parliamentarians, I don't think it is for me as a non-elected parliamentarian to try to grapple with this. And so, Madam President, I prefer instead to examine other aspects of the motion as presented. And so, I will first state, Madam President, that before we vote and say aye, and before the ayes have it, we need to ensure, Madam President, that this piece of legislation, this amendment, this exemption, actually benefits and reaches those that it was intended to benefit. And that is why we have to have a debate. Because, of course, we have seen before that the government has come to the Honorable House with very valuable pieces of legislation, well intended, but in its implementation, we have had to question whether the piece of legislation actually achieved the objectives that it was set out to achieve. And so, Madam President, when it comes to this piece of legislation, this motion before us this morning, I noted that the items, the list of items that were listed, and I wish not to go through the entire list, but the items listed suggest that they are meant for certain people. And so, since it has been placed in the hands of elected parliamentarians who are politicians, and of course, we have seen what has happened before with previous efforts during the COVID assistance period, I would like to suggest that we pay attention to the mechanisms that we may have to put in place to ensure that the process of getting these items and making sure that they reach the persons that they're supposed to reach works well. There's a common phrase, Madam President, that we must trust the process. And it's a management a phrase you hear a lot in management. But we must ensure that there are mechanisms in place to make sure the process works. If we are to have total dependence on a politician or politicians, the 17 members of this lower house, to ensure that all deserving, needy constituents in all the 17 constituencies benefit as they should, I think that we have to examine this a little closer, not just for what it says in the House, but for the implications it may have for those it should benefit. Madam President, outside of the elected members, I am sure that we can agree that there are other persons and organizations that may wish to do likewise, and we have already embarked on this type of effort before. As a community person, I have been part of such organizations that have, during Christmas and other times during the year, sought to reach out and source resources to assist and to bring some cheer to children, the needy, and the vulnerable. And I believe that such a facility should also be made available to persons within the 17 constituencies, organizations within the constituencies who have a similar intention. So while I don't think you should deprive an elected parliamentarian from the opportunity to benefit, I believe that doing so exclusively to them, we may be falling short in the process. And so I say, Madam President, that just to ensure that there is equity and fairness, and that there is no suspicion that, as was heard in the previous debate, that some persons or some parliamentarians may feel that they are slighted or disadvantaged, that could be achieved if voluntary organizations, corporate citizens, and other groups and individuals within the 17 constituencies wish to do likewise. I don't think there's anything to lose if that happens. Madam President, I think also that when we do those, what I would consider, when these token gestures come to the House and we legislate them, we have to also look at the possibility of having a more comprehensive approach to it. From time to time, we will have to come to amend legislation. I understand that, but there are times that if we take a more comprehensive approach, we will not have to take or make those piecemeal and token gestures that can cause suspicion, lack of trust, and for persons to misinterpret the intent of the piece of legislation or the amendment. And I believe most of the discussion that has gone on, Madam President, regarding whether this will achieve its objective is because anytime something in this country, based on the patterns that we've seen before, particularly in the last 9 months, anytime any resource or anything is left in the hands of solely in the hands of politicians, particularly the elected politicians on this side of the House, many of us get very anxious, and there's always speculation and suspicion. And this is not just so, it is because there's reason for it. So, Madam President, I think as a country we can do better. I think as a country we should minimize any semblance of discrimination or perceived advantage, and ensure that the discussion in the House, the wording of the legislation, and as I mentioned earlier, a comprehensive approach will not make or allow for all of this suspicion and lack of trust in the process that I mentioned before. So I hope that if this is to happen in the future, next Christmas, for example, that it will not solely be for elected parliamentarians, but it will also be extended to others within the country, groups and individuals who have a genuine intent to assist the vulnerable, the needy, and the less fortunate, and bring cheer. Madam President, it is not only politicians who can bring cheer to our children, to our vulnerable, to our needy. It is not only politicians who can do that, Madam President. As a matter of fact, the average St. Lucian will tell you that they don't even believe that the politicians do a good job. And so let us help the politicians by not just criticizing them, but by saying that what the politicians seek to do, especially the elected members, other factions of the constituency, other organizations with similar interests, other individuals can join in the process, and we can extend the same courtesy to them so that there's a more holistic approach to it. And then St. Lucians might trust the process a little more. With these few words, Madam President, I'd like to end on this motion. Thank you.
Senator Ogier.
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, fellow senators. A few brief comments on the matter before us. Madam President, these are exceptional times, and we have in the last calendar year been forced to consider exceptional measures to address them, and that is perfectly acceptable. But then there is a need to maintain balance as always, and there's a need to maintain transparency. And so I believe that if we are passing this legislation because we are in exceptional times, then there should be some time limit to the legislation that we have. I am not referring to the time limit of November 15th to January. I am referring to the life of the Act itself. Is this an indefinite provision which is going to continue for the foreseeable future? Then I would say that we can do better than that. This is exceptional, and I use the word decidedly because it singles out specific people, or more accurately, it singles out a specific category of person who shall have this exceptional power to import. And we raise that, Madam President, in the context of the language of the VAT legislation, which deliberately made it difficult, and I say deliberately, again I use the word with intent, it made it difficult for VAT to be waived in any ad hoc manner, and actually that is why we are here and it has to come to Parliament. So the spirit, the original spirit of the VAT legislation is that it should not be lightly tampered with. It should not be lightly waived for all sorts of reasons, including the revenue implications this will have on government. So I believe, Madam President, that we should not be looking at a legislation which amends the VAT Act to empower such a narrow category of persons to be exempted from the payment of VAT, and for such a wide category of goods as is mentioned here in the paper, including personal gifts. That is a very loose definition. I believe, Madam President, that this measure, as well-intentioned, could easily be extended to other agencies, as has been mentioned earlier, with similar credentials and similar mandates and similar intentions, because certainly the ability to assist communities, especially at this time, is not an exclusive matter for elected parliamentarians only. Similarly, Madam President, I believe that there should be a limit on the value, the dollar value of the goods that can be imported under such an act. There must be a way of determining what a reasonable value is, and to prevent abuse, I believe that there should be a cap, a dollar value cap based on the number of constituents in the average constituency or something to the effect, but we should not have this open-ended free-for-all allowing, again, a very narrow category of persons to import as they wish, despite the good intentions of the legislation. I also believe that there should be a time frame within which the goods must be distributed. So while there is a time frame for their importation into the country, there should also be a time frame for their local distribution. And typically what would be done in similar circumstances is that if you have not distributed the goods, by the end of the intended period, which is January 2021, so we could say January 31st, 2021, the goods should be turned over to a registered charity so that they do not become the personal domain, they remain in the personal domain of a parliamentarian. So if by January you have not distributed the goods, you have no intention of keeping a stock of goods under your house or elsewhere, then you hand them over to Red Cross or Rotary or one of the charitable organizations, a faith-based organization or someone like that, so that there is absolute transparency and your good intentions do not get construed as otherwise.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, on a point of elucidation, just so that we get things straight, because I'm taking notes.
Pardon?
Point of elucidation.
Yes?
Yes, Madam President. Senator is saying that if it is not consumed by the 31st of January, I just want to state or to reiterate that the exemption goes as far as January 31st. So, which means you can still order up to that point of time. So you cannot really dispose of goods that you have not really ordered. So I just want to make it clear that the end date is January 30th or 31st.
Thank you for the clarification, Madam Leader of Government
Senator
Business.
Ogier.
Yes, ma'am.
No, for recording purposes, I need to name you. So
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, Madam President, the mention of the date is somewhat arbitrary. I am merely saying that there should be a cutoff. It can be February 31st for that matter, so that if you have authority to import goods into the country up to the date that they arrive, the final date being January 31st, then you have a moral obligation to distribute those goods to the intended beneficiaries within a specified time. Let it be February 29th in a leap year, if necessary, but you cannot or you should not retain possession of a stock of goods which is intended for distribution beyond a specific date. If by such and such a date you have not been able to distribute them within the community, then they should be handed over to a charitable organization which keeps records and accounts and will sign for their receipt and will undertake the proper distribution in due course. You have Rotary, you have Lions, you have Salvation Army, you have any number of faith-based organizations who are active throughout the country. Madam President, I am wary of the identification of such a select group of persons, whereas there are provisions under the barrel legislation currently in force that could have been expanded and which would have applied to any importer who had similar intention. So such a narrow definition of who is exempt, irrespective of who it is, it could have been any other category of persons. I think that this is ill-advised and unwise. I think that if we are making legislation, we must make legislation that empowers all similarly intentioned persons to act accordingly. So in my view, it would have been better to expand the bar legislation in these exceptional times to allow for a reduction of VAT, as is the intention of the VAT legislation when it was brought before the House. I think to give substance to that suggestion, we could have used the term approved importer, which finds itself in several other pieces of legislation related to incentives, and an improved importer could have then been defined in a schedule, which could then be amended or expanded or reduced as necessary. So any approved importer of similar intent and similar capacity could have been included on a schedule rather than making parliamentarians the sole custodians of this exceptional privilege. And again, it is exceptional, Madam Chair, because there's virtually no limit to what can be imported and when it must be handed over to the intended beneficiaries. As mentioned earlier, I am very, very concerned with language, personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season. That is totally undefined. I would like a new BMW as a personal present. I hope that qualifies. the direct importation also bypasses the local private sector. So we already have a situation where local retail is under siege. And the passage of the bar legislation since June has put a lot of mom and pop stores and big businesses under pressure because now everybody can be their own merchant. Once again, we are bypassing the local private sector and we're empowering people to do direct importation. That's the same private sector that has to employ, that has to pay taxes, that has to invest, and once again we are bypassing them. It's the same private sector that we go to for campaign contributions and for emergency supplies, and we just solicited a lot of goods and support from them at the time of the telethon at the beginning of this COVID pandemic, and here we are bypassing them again. I want to mention that the retail sector is under siege in this country. We are going to continue to see closures of businesses. We need to find measures that incorporate the domestic private sector in the good intentions of government, especially at times of crisis. These are the people who are keeping our brothers and sisters employed. Madam President, to close, I'm concerned about the range of goods. There is not an attempt to identify essentials, and essentials at this time have to include things like medical supplies, which is critical to people's continued life. It does not specify medicine, for example, and it does not specify, which I think it should, goods coming in from international agencies trying to help the country. We have a number of external agencies who wish to send goods to St. Lucia. There are a lot of charitable persons here also trying to mobilize food stuff, medicines, clothing, and so forth. These people do not receive this sort of attention, and I think that they should. And even persons who are working locally to try and distribute even tablets to school children this should be included as essential. Madam President, I was in Canaries on the weekend and speaking with the principal of one of the schools. She reports that 70% of her students do not have access to a device, do not have access to internet. 70% of the school population in one district is a lot of children, and we should be a little broader in our scope in terms of strengthening this legislation to take care of some of those things. So while it is wonderful, especially at this time, for parliamentarians to be able to be generous with their constituents, it's wonderful and it will generate much love and goodwill and no doubt some votes. But the thing is that we need to think broader than that, because this is a time of exceptional hardship in the country and we can do better. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Jawahir.
Thank you, Madam President. Permit me just for a moment to extend holiday greetings to the people of St. Lucia, to my fellow parliamentarians on both sides of the House, to the Office of Parliament, and also to our frontline workers who may not have a Christmas break like some of us, but who will be out there at work fighting for us and fighting to keep all of us safe. Madam President, although my time as a newly appointed senator for 2020 has been very short, and this might just be the last time that we see each other in the House, I must say that I really appreciate the opportunity to share my views and my concerns with some of the resolutions that have been put before us. And I want to, through you, Madam President, show a little more appreciation to what the Leader of Opposition Business has shared, and also to Senator Dr. Oje, who have expressed similar concerns. So I will be very brief. I know this is a time that our people have really been looking forward to. what has happened with COVID-19 has really shifted our focus, and it has taken us to a place where we have had to reassess how we live, how we spend, to take a little more time to appreciate those who ordinarily we would have been able to see at any time that we wanted. And even if you recall at the beginning of the shutdown, some of us, we were not able to see our loved ones, we were not able to see our friends, we had to socially distance ourselves from them. And in this season, some persons who would have seen each other for the first time for the year, families are not able to travel because of what has been presented, what we are facing. So on the resolution before us, this value added tax, this VAT exemption on some items, while I believe that some of these items are well intentioned in terms of exemptions from VAT, I just want to share a few concerns on some of the items. For our children, I certainly understand how toys may bring some cheer to them. Some of them, and I've had the pleasure of being very close to a lot of children in the time I've been on earth, some of them will really look forward to that. It will put a smile on their faces because they have not been able to see their friends, they cannot play, that sort of thing. The care packages that elected parliamentarians will have the benefit of getting VAT exemption for onward distribution to those children, the vulnerable and needy persons. I think this is a good initiative, and I just want to highlight, because of course persons are still suffering, they're still very hungry. I know Nemo, and I also want to thank Nemo for doing, and the volunteers across St. Lucia who have been doing an exceptional job, putting themselves also at risk to try to bring some sort of assistance to our people. I know Nemo was doing the best that it could, and they're still working as hard as they can, but we understand that it's not just COVID, but it's a lot of the issues that we are facing now, we have been facing for a long time. So our job is not done. For personal hygiene products, this VAT exemption for a month, I just want to state on the record that I believe personal hygiene products, for example, sanitary napkins, tampons for our girls, for our women, should not get a VAT exemption for only a period of 1 month. Some of you may be aware, if you have been following closely, Scotland recently exempted VAT on all sanitary products for its people. This is not just for a period of 1 month, but this is on a consistent basis. And I know of some examples where some young girls have not been able to attend school because they cannot afford a sanitary napkin, and I think we need to do a better job in ending period poverty in St. Lucia. So I just wanted to state that I think the government needs to look into this a little further and ensure that we provide a little more assistance for our women and our girls out there. And I'm assuming the personal protective supplies may be related to COVID. I want to also echo the sentiments of Senator Ogier, who expressed that there's a greater need for medical supplies and medical assistance to also be placed on this list. But I have a little concern with the latter part of the list, and whilst I did express that I believe that these may be well-intentioned, and I want to commend the people of St. Lucia who have taken a greater responsibility now to be more in tune with what's going on, to show their concerns, to really come out and express how they feel about mass borrowing, spending of their taxpayers' money, of their NIC funds. They're the ones who would say that for them at this critical time we need to do better in terms of prioritizing. And Madam President, it would be remiss of me if I didn't state that I do not believe that Christmas lights, which will be taken down in 2 weeks, Christmas decorations, which will be taken down in 2 weeks, when people don't even know how they are going to power those lights, because some of them cannot even pay their electricity bills. I do not think that this is a priority at this time. I think we need to go back to the drawing board and understand that we need to reassess the needs of the people, or go back there and find out exactly what it is that they are in need of, because the suffering and the pain that a lot of them have had to experience since COVID-19, it has not ended. It's not even close to ending. And whereas under normal circumstances, this may well be very much appreciated, these people are still telling you that we need food, we need shelter. And as somebody who grew up under very vulnerable circumstances, I could tell you as a child, it would have been very important for me to know where my next meal would come from. It would have been very important for my parents to figure that out. And even if parts of the house was falling on us, this is the type of assistance that we needed. This is the type of assistance that people across St. Lucia are still in need of. Because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these issues still exist, and it's not just through COVID. So whereas we want to bring some good holiday cheer, Madam President, I do not think that Christmas lights and Christmas decorations, as I said, which will be taken down in a matter of 2 weeks, will feed our people. And that takes me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approve the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt imports by an elected parliamentarian for the benefit of children, the vulnerable and needy persons in the constituency of the elected parliamentarian, of toys, food supplies, care packages, including items for personal use such as food, personal hygiene products, and other personal protective supplies, gift items including personal presents to be given as part of the Christmas holiday season, Christmas decorations including Christmas lights, ornaments, and accessories used for decorative purposes during the Christmas holiday season. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motions. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament authorizing the Minister of Finance to borrow for capital or current expenditure of government. Whereas it is provided by Section 63(1) of the Public Finance Management Act, number 14 of 2020, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or other financial institution for capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 64 of the Act, that money borrowed by the government must be paid into and from and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance deems it necessary to borrow from commercial banks sums not exceeding $85 million as follows. A, Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, EC dollars 4,400,000. B, Royal Bank of Canada, EC dollars 5,600,000. C, First Caribbean International Bank, EC dollars 8 million. D, Republic Bank, EC Limited, EC dollars 12 million. E, First National Bank, St. Lucia Limited, EC dollars 5 million. F, Bank of St. Lucia, EC dollars 50 million. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from commercial banks sums not exceeding $85 million as follows. A, Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, EC dollars 4,400,000. B, Royal Bank of Canada, EC dollars 5,600,000. C, First Caribbean International Bank, EC dollars 8 million. D, Republic Bank EC Limited, EC dollars 12 million. E, First National Bank St. Lucia Limited, EC dollars 5 million. F, Bank of St. Lucia, EC dollars 50 million. Madam President, This resolution seeks parliamentary approval for the government of St. Lucia to renew the overdraft facilities at commercial banks mentioned in the resolution. This is an overdraft facility that is being requested, and the authorization comes under Parliamentary Resolution number 86 of 2020, which authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow sums not exceeding EC $85 million outstanding at any one time by means of fluctuating overdrafts from commercial banks. Madam President, this is a regular occurrence. It is not actual borrowing. We are asking for an overdraft. Of course, prior to now, there was an established overdraft, and it has come to an end. Therefore, in order for us to continue the business of government, we need to establish a new overdraft so that we can continue as is required from our budget documents. Madam President, the overdraft facilities at these commercial banks will be utilized to facilitate the timely settlement of government expenditures, such as salaries and other operating expenses. We are quite aware that from the onset of COVID, Madam President, government has not been able to collect the amount of revenue that was expected. As a result, we have had to go through different mechanisms to enable us to continue the operations of government. The current resolution, like I said, Madam President, it ended on December the 8th of 2020, earlier this month. Therefore, it has become necessary to obtain this new resolution, like I mentioned before, to continue the work of government. We all know that every country is struggling under this whole COVID epidemic, and it is no secret, Madam President, that we have not collected the amount of revenue that we ought to have collected, and therefore, we have to establish measures to fall back on. This resolution is being presented under the newly enacted Public Finance Management Act, which transitioned from the repealed Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501. Madam President, while the new Public Finance Management Act does not include any provisions to limit the overdraft facility to a period of not exceeding 6 months, like the previous Finance Act, we now require a new parliamentary approval because the former act lapsed on December the 8th, the former period lapsed on December the 8th, 2020, and therefore we must activate a new overdraft starting with a new period moving forward. Madam President, the overdraft facility is expected to generate an average interest cost for the financial year of approximately $850,000, which represents a cost of less than 1% on that facility. Overdraft borrowing by the government attracts interest rates ranging from 10% to 11.5% per annum at the various commercial banks. However, with the advent of the regional government securities market, the government has been able to borrow short-term funds by issuing treasury bills. And these bills have been able to attract interest rates as low as 1.99% on the regional government securities market. Therefore, Madam President, I am presenting this resolution for the approval of this Honorable House in order for us to continue to sustain our public workers' salaries and other such government expenditure. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow from commercial banks sums not exceeding $85 million as follows. A. Royal Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, EC $4,400,000. B. Royal Bank of Canada, EC $5,600,000. C. First Caribbean International Bank, EC $8 million. D. Republic Bank, EC Limited, EC $12 million. E. First National Bank of St. Lucia, EC $5 million. And F. Bank of St. Lucia, EC $50 million. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move a motion to suspend an adjournment, Madam President, for about 10 minutes break.
The question is that the Senate be suspended for 10 minutes. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.